What happens when two powerful men meet in secret? One fighting for Africa's future and the other, a former U.S. president, ready to confess his regrets. This is the story of a meeting that could change the course of history. It was a quiet afternoon in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, when President Ibrahim Traoré received an unexpected message. His advisors handed him a sealed letter from a diplomatic envoy, an official request for a secret meeting. The letter was brief but clear. Former U.S. President Barack Obama wanted to meet with him in private, away from the eyes of the public and media. Ibrahim had heard whispers of Obama's admiration for his leadership. But this was an invitation that came out of nowhere. Why Obama? Why now? And what did the former president want to discuss so secretly? These questions swirled in Ibrahim's mind as he read the letter. His curiosity piqued, but his expression remained neutral. The world had been watching Burkina Faso and Ibrahim Traoré ever since he took office. His leadership had been bold, defiant even, as he championed Burkina Faso's sovereignty and rejected the dominance of Western powers. Many in the West had criticized him for being too outspoken, for aligning himself with countries like North Korea, and for challenging the status quo. Now, to meet a former American president, someone who had once been seen as the leader of the free world, was both a surprise and an opportunity. After a moment of contemplation, Ibrahim decided to accept the invitation. The meeting would take place in a secluded government compound in the city, away from the prying eyes of the press. Only a few of his closest advisors knew about the meeting, and they too were puzzled by the secrecy. That evening, Ibrahim arrived at the meeting spot, his security forces ensuring that no one could intercept his movements. Inside the private room, there was an air of tension, as if this meeting could shift the course of something much larger. Ibrahim stepped in and was greeted by the familiar face of Barack Obama. The two men shook hands and Obama's smile was warm. Yet, there was something deeper in his eyes, something that spoke of both respect and regret. Ibrahim, though composed, felt a sense of anticipation. What was Obama really here to talk about? What would this meeting mean for Burkina Faso and its place on the global stage? "Thank you for meeting me, President Traoré," Obama began, his voice calm but purposeful. "I know this is unconventional, but I've been following your work and the courage you've shown in leading your country. I wanted to speak with you personally without the constraints of public scrutiny. There's much to discuss between us, matters of great importance." Ibrahim nodded, waiting for Obama to continue. He had never expected such a meeting, especially not from a figure as influential as Obama. The world had changed since Obama's time in office, and Ibrahim knew the stakes were high. This was not just about Burkina Faso, it was about Africa's future. "I'm listening," Ibrahim said simply, his voice steady, giving no hint of what he was thinking. Obama took a deep breath, his expression turning serious. "There are things I want to say to you, Ibrahim. Things that need to be said face to face." Obama settled into his chair and for a moment the two men sat in silence. The air in the room felt heavy as if the weight of history was pressing down on them. Finally, Obama spoke again, his voice soft but filled with emotion. "I've watched your leadership, Ibrahim," Obama began. "And I must say I admire your courage. Burkina Faso, under your leadership, has become a symbol of resistance, of standing firm in the face of external pressure. You're not just fighting for your country, you're fighting for Africa." Ibrahim nodded, listening intently but saying nothing. He had never expected Obama to acknowledge him in this way. He was used to being criticized by the West, labeled as stubborn or rebellious. But Obama's words were different. They were filled with a deep understanding of what it meant to challenge global powers. Obama paused, then continued, "I know you've faced a lot of challenges, both from within your own country and from the world outside. But I wanted to speak to you about something else. Something I've carried with me since I left office. And I believe it's time I said it, especially to someone like you." Ibrahim raised an eyebrow, intrigued. He had heard many things about Obama, but this confession, was unexpected. "President Traoré, I have regrets," Obama said, looking down briefly as if searching for the right words. "When I was in office, I didn't do enough for Africa. I didn't do enough to support leaders like you. We talk a lot about Africa's potential. But when it came to actually changing things, when it came to empowering African nations to make their own choices, I was silent. I didn't take the risks that needed to be taken." Ibrahim listened quietly, processing the weight of Obama's words. He had never heard a leader of the West speak so openly about their mistakes. It was a rare moment of vulnerability, and despite the political differences, Ibrahim found it hard not to respect Obama for this honesty. "I should have done more," Obama continued, his voice growing firmer. I should have recognized the strength of African leadership and stood behind you and others like you when the world tried to suppress you. Instead, I allowed the West to continue to hold the strings. I'm sorry for that. Ibrahim took a deep breath, his mind racing. He had always seen Obama as a symbol of hope. But hearing these words now added a new layer to his view of the former president. The apology wasn't just about personal shortcomings, it was about something much larger, the West's ongoing interference in African matters. It was about the constant pressure African leaders like him had to endure. I appreciate your words, Mr. Obama, Ibrahim replied, his voice steady but thoughtful. But Africa's fight for sovereignty is not just about apologies, it's about action. For far too long, Africa has been treated as a place to exploit, to control, and to manipulate. It's time for that to end. Obama nodded, acknowledging the truth in Ibrahim's words. You're right, and that's why I wanted to meet with you. I believe Africa can no longer wait for permission to rise. You've already shown that with your leadership. You're standing up to the powers that have long held Africa back, and that's something I respect. The room was quiet for a moment. Ibrahim thought about the weight of Obama's admission and the broader implications of what he was saying. For a long time, Ibrahim had believed that Africa's future depended on its leaders and the strength of its people. But now, Obama's words confirmed something else. Africa's future would also depend on the willingness of Western powers to recognize their wrongs and allow Africa to chart its own course. I'm not interested in looking back, Ibrahim finally said. What matters now is what we do moving forward. Africa must stand on its own. We will no longer wait for approval. We will build our future with our own hands, based on our own values, not the values that have been imposed upon us. Obama smiled slightly, his eyes reflecting both regret and admiration. I agree. The future of Africa is in the hands of leaders like you. You are creating a new path, a path that doesn't rely on the West's goodwill, but on the strength and unity of Africa itself. As the conversation continued, they spoke of many things. About Africa's potential, about the need for unity, about the challenges the continent faced. Obama shared his thoughts on the global order, on the way the West viewed Africa, and on how those perceptions needed to change. Ibrahim listened carefully, asking questions, offering his own perspective on what needed to be done for Africa to truly become independent. But in the back of Ibrahim's mind, one thought lingered. The West's view of Africa had to shift, yes. But Africa's view of itself also needed to change. The power of African nations could only grow when Africa stopped seeing itself through the eyes of the West and started seeing its own potential. I hope, Mr. Obama, Ibrahim said towards the end of their conversation, that the lessons learned from the past can help us build a better future together. But Africa must lead the way. We cannot depend on others to fix our problems. We will fix them ourselves. Obama stood and extended his hand to Ibrahim, a gesture of respect and solidarity. I believe you will, and I will support you however I can. As they shook hands, the weight of their conversation hung in the air. Ibrahim knew that his mission was far from over. The road ahead would be filled with obstacles, but he also knew that Africa had begun to wake up. The silence that had once hung over the continent was slowly being replaced by voices of strength and pride, voices that could no longer be ignored. And Ibrahim Traoré, with his bold vision and unshakable resolve, would be one of the leaders leading that charge. The unwavering path. As the days passed after the secret meeting with Obama, Ibrahim Traoré couldn't shake the weight of their conversation. The words exchanged lingered in his mind, and he found himself reflecting on everything they had discussed. Obama's apology, his admission of the West's historical failings, and the recognition of Africa's right to lead. Was a lot to take in. But there was something else that stuck with Ibrahim, the quiet understanding that Africa's time had come. Ibrahim sat in his office one morning, looking out the window as the sun rose over Ouagadougou. The city seemed different now. The streets were bustling with people, but there was an energy in the air that hadn't been there before. It was as if the country had felt the shift in the wind, the growing realization that things were changing, not just in Burkina Faso but across the continent. Ibrahim's thoughts were interrupted by a knock on his office door. It was General Cabaret, his trusted military leader who had been by his side since the beginning of his rise to power. General Cabaret entered with a stack of reports, his face serious. President Traoré, he said, setting the papers on the desk. We've received word from neighboring countries. There's increasing concern about the direction you're taking with Burkina Faso's independence. Some leaders are questioning our alliances, especially after the meeting with Obama. Ibrahim sighed but didn't look away from the window. He had expected this. There were always going to be those who feared change, those who were unwilling to see beyond the established order. But for Ibrahim, this was more than just about Burkina Faso. It was about Africa as a whole, and he wouldn't back down now. "Tell them to question all they want," Ibrahim replied, his voice firm. "This is the right path. If they cannot understand that, then they are not ready to lead their own countries. We cannot keep allowing the West to decide our futures. I will not be the president who stands by and watches Africa remain subjugated." Traoré nodded, but there was still concern in his eyes. "But sir, the economic situation is worsening. Sanctions from the West have made things difficult for us. Trade is almost at a standstill. The people are starting to feel the pinch, and there are whispers of discontent in the streets." Ibrahim leaned forward, his expression hardening. "We knew it wouldn't be easy, but no one said freedom would come without a cost. We are building something that lasts. Our people will understand that. They will see that we are fighting for something bigger than immediate comfort. We are fighting for our children, for their future, for Africa's place in the world." Despite the general's concerns, Ibrahim's resolve only grew stronger. He had known that standing up to the West would bring challenges, but he had made his decision. There was no turning back now. Burkina Faso could not afford to be a puppet of foreign interests any longer. The time for African leaders to take charge of their own destinies had arrived. Uniting a continent. Later that evening, Ibrahim addressed the nation in a televised broadcast. His voice was calm but full of conviction as he spoke to the people of Burkina Faso and to Africa at large. "The time has come for Africa to stand as one. We will not bend to the whims of foreign powers. We will not be controlled by those who have long taken advantage of our resources, our people, and our lands. Our future is ours to build. We will not allow anyone to decide for us what our future should look like." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "I know that the road ahead will be difficult. I know that some of you are suffering because of the pressures we face. But this is not just about one country. This is about Africa's future. We must unite and stand firm. Together, we will create a future where our children can live freely, where they can thrive without the chains of foreign dominance." The broadcast ended, and for a moment there was silence in the room. Ibrahim sat back in his chair, knowing the words he had just spoken would be met with both support and criticism. But he had said what needed to be said. He had made it clear that Burkina Faso would no longer bow to foreign powers. It was a bold message, one that resonated not just in his own country but across the continent. The next few days were filled with intense international reactions. Western leaders criticized Ibrahim's speech, calling it a step backward for diplomacy and cooperation. They accused him of further isolating Burkina Faso from the international community. But on the streets of Ouagadougou, the response was different. People gathered to discuss Ibrahim's words, their faces filled with hope and determination. They knew the struggle ahead would be hard, but they were willing to fight for their country's future. In the capital, crowds began to form, chanting slogans of unity and independence. Ibrahim's leadership had sparked something within the people of Burkina Faso. They were no longer passive, they were active participants in the fight for their country's freedom. And the more the West tried to push back, the stronger the resolve of the people became. Ibrahim spent the following weeks strengthening his relationships with other African nations, particularly those who had shown solidarity with Burkina Faso's stance. Leaders from countries like South Africa, Kenya, and Nigeria began to express support for his vision, recognizing that his fight for independence was not just about Burkina Faso, it was about the entire continent. But Ibrahim also knew that he could not rely solely on international support. He had to focus on building a strong, resilient Burkina Faso, one that could stand on its own without the need for outside help. To that end, he began directing more resources into local industries, investing in education, healthcare, and agriculture. He made it clear to his people that they would not be dependent on foreign aid. They would rely on their own strength, their own creativity, and their own unity. The cost of independence. As the months passed, the pressure from the West continued to grow, but Ibrahim's leadership remained unshaken. The challenges were immense, but he had seen how powerful Africa could be when it stood together. And though the road ahead was uncertain, Ibrahim Traoré knew one thing for sure: Africa's future would be built on its own terms. With that vision, he continued to lead Burkina Faso, knowing that the future of the entire continent was at stake. The months that followed Ibrahim Traoré's speech were marked by both hope and growing challenges. While Burkina Faso's determination to stand firm against Western influence remained unshaken, the price of independence began to take its toll. The international community, led by the US and France, tightened its grip, imposing even harsher sanctions on Burkina Faso. The sanctions were starting to bite hard. Prices for basic goods surged. Unemployment climbed. The financial strain on the country was becoming apparent, and the people were feeling the effects more than ever. In Ouagadougou, the markets that once bustled with life now seemed quieter. The streets were filled with murmurs of concern as the people began to worry about what was to come. The youth, in particular, had begun to feel the weight of the sacrifices. They had rallied behind Ibrahim's message, but now many began to ask how long they could endure the hardships that came with the fight for freedom. Ibrahim knew that this was the moment that would define his presidency. Would the people continue to support him, or would the hardships be too much? One evening, as Ibrahim sat in his office, the reports in front of him seemed to reflect the growing frustration in the country. The political opposition, who had been quiet for months, were now becoming more vocal. They criticized his handling of the economy, accusing him of pushing Burkina Faso into a crisis. Some of his own allies in the government began to question the wisdom of his decisions. Would continuing to challenge the West lead to permanent damage for Burkina Faso? Ibrahim sat quietly, taking in the reality of the situation. He knew that every decision had consequences, and that some of those consequences could be severe. But he also knew that true independence never came without sacrifice. He thought about the words of his ancestors, about the struggles they had faced to free the land, to free the people of Africa from the chains of colonialism. He knew they hadn't given up, and neither could he. The next morning he gathered his closest advisors. As they sat around the table, the tension in the room was palpable. His trusted military leader, General Traoré, spoke first. President Traoré, the pressure is growing. The people are starting to ask hard questions. We cannot afford to lose their support. We need to show them that this fight is worth it. Ibrahim looked around at his team, their faces full of concern. They had been with him through thick and thin, and they all knew what was at stake. He could feel the weight of their trust and loyalty, but he also knew that his decision was not going to be easy. We will not back down, Ibrahim said, his voice steady but firm. We must continue to fight, but we must also show our people that we are working towards something better. The struggle is long, but the end is worth it. He leaned forward and continued, we will invest in our own industries. We will focus on agriculture, on education, and on building a strong foundation for Burkina Faso. We will not depend on anyone but ourselves. And the world will see that Africa does not need their charity to survive. We have everything we need right here. General Traoré nodded, but there was a hint of worry in his eyes. And the West, sir, they will not take kindly to this. I am not afraid of their threats, Ibrahim replied. Burkina Faso is no longer their pawn. We will face the consequences of our actions, but we will face them with pride, and we will build a future that is not dependent on anyone but ourselves. A united future. For the next several days, Ibrahim and his team worked tirelessly on new strategies to boost Burkina Faso's self-sufficiency. They began to focus on sustainable development, training farmers to improve crop yields, increasing investment in local industries, and ensuring that Burkina Faso's economy would not be tied to the whims of foreign nations. Ibrahim addressed the nation again, urging them to stand together through the hard times ahead. The journey will not be easy, Ibrahim said in his speech. But we are not afraid. We are building a future that is free, that is strong. We are taking back what is ours. And in the end, we will stand tall. The response was mixed. There were still pockets of resistance, both from within the country and outside. But for the first time, Ibrahim felt that he had truly united his people in a way that transcended the immediate hardships. The struggle wasn't just about fighting the West, it was about rebuilding Africa from the ground up, creating a future where Africa could make its own decisions, free from interference. Weeks turned into months, and while the difficulties didn't disappear overnight, there were signs of progress. Burkina Faso began to make strides in food production, with local farmers producing more than ever before. Small businesses slowly began to thrive again as people began to rely on their own resources. The economy was still fragile, but Ibrahim could see the seeds of change being planted. And then a surprise came from the African Union. After months of quiet deliberations, several African leaders began to publicly support Ibrahim's stance on African independence. Slowly, other countries began to speak out in favor of what Burkina Faso was trying to achieve. Ibrahim was invited to several diplomatic talks where he spoke of a united Africa, of an Africa that would no longer be held down by colonial history or foreign influence. In the midst of it all, the West continued to criticize Ibrahim's policies. But now something was different. The support from other African nations was growing, and it became clear that Ibrahim Traoré was no longer just the president of Burkina Faso. He was becoming a symbol of African defiance, of the continent's desire for freedom, unity, and dignity. As Ibrahim sat in his office late one evening, he reflected on the road ahead. The fight was far from over, but for the first time he truly believed that Africa had begun to stand up for itself. And that belief, that strength, would carry Burkina Faso and Africa into a future where they could determine their own fate, free from the shackles of foreign control.